Welcome, listeners. My name's Sebastian, and these are my co-hosts, Amani and Caitlin.
Hi.
Hey.
And this is the 3GenZs podcast, where we inform fellow Gen Zs about issues in our society and how they affect us. Today, we're talking about gender-neutral pronoun usage, and how generational perspective affects the way people think about pronoun usage in academia and daily life.
Yeah, there's this idea out there that older people are unaccepting of new pronoun usage, but we believe that this unacceptance relates back to generations, not literal age.
Amani, could you give some context to what we're discussing today?
Of course, Sebastian. Today we're going to be looking at gender-neutral pronouns and how people use them differently based on generational differences.
So how do generational differences happen, Sebastian?
Basically, Amani is saying that generations are groups of people born in a specific time span. For example, we're all Gen Z because we were born between 1997 and 2012. And growing up in different time periods often means being raised differently, specifically having different beliefs. Back to you, Amani.
Thanks for the clarification, Sebastian. Generational opinion differences are important when trying to understand why different generations are resistant to adapting to this new norm. Like, before, the only pronouns we had were he and she, but now society is getting used to gender-neutral pronouns like they, or the creation of new pronouns. Some generations of society are more adaptable to these changes than others.
That resistance or acceptance of those changes sounds a lot like the term linguistic determinism, where words determine attitudes.
Well, what do you mean by that, Caitlin?
So I read this article where they talked about how people's words can affect how they think about the world. Like older people grew up using only he and she pronouns, making them less accepting of pronoun changes, whereas Gen Z has grown up using new uses of pronouns, so we're generally accepting of pronoun changes since it's a familiar concept.
Well, let's talk about society's current thoughts about these pronoun changes. There are a lot of different opinions causing a complex response.
I know one of the newer thoughts about pronoun usage is that it's too limited. Like, some people feel like there aren't enough pronouns to accurately describe the lack of link between gender and anatomy. Like, for example, there are people born he but don't feel like they're any gender. Therefore, they may need a gender-neutral pronoun to represent them.
Right. It seems there's really just not one way to conform to gender, and that's probably why people call for more versatile pronoun usage.
Why do you think some people feel that way, Caitlin?
I think some people want more versatile pronouns because they probably wish for there to be other ways to make themselves and others comfortable. Like for us, we all happen to identify as our biological genders. But imagine if she or he didn't exist. Like at that point, it would be uncomfortable because we wouldn't have a pronoun to identify with. And this is basically what a significant portion of the population is going through right now.
Right. And then there's the opposite opinion out there that there are only two genders, boy and girl, and that is it.
Well, it looks like whether to change pronouns or keep them the way they are two very polarizing ideas that surround pronoun usage. To be honest, I see this difference in acceptance level a lot with my grandparents, parents, and peers.
Yeah, acceptance level of the trans and non-binary community in general seems to correlate with age. A lot of older people like my grandparents aren't really accepting of this, while younger people like my friends are.
But I feel like it's not only age per se, Amani, because there are people out there all ages who support or don't support pronoun changes.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Like, it's not like there's a magic age that suddenly causes you to not like new pronouns.
Well, I did some research on the correlation between age and gender-neutral pronoun usage, and I found that in the ages 18 and 24, almost 61% of people were comfortable using gender-neutral pronouns. However, as the age got older, the data seemed to lean toward being uncomfortable using gender-neutral pronouns.
Wow, that kind of shows that younger generations are more comfortable with gender-neutral pronoun usage. Why do you think that is, Amani?
I think it's more of an awareness thing. For example, the trans and non-binary community was introduced in 2015 when Caitlyn Jenner came out as a transgender woman. Now we're in 2022, and I was 11 when that happened. This just goes to show that my generation, Gen Z, didn't completely grow up calling people they or referring to people as their preferred gender identity. So why do we think that generations like millennials, Gen X, baby boomers would be able to adapt to these new concepts when they didn't have to think about it much for most of their life?
Exactly. This is why pronoun usage connects back to linguistic determinism. I feel like part of the reason why older generations aren't excited to accept this concept is because it is hard for them to comprehend. Like when they grew up, everyone was a she or a he, and the concept of identifying as a different gender was extremely rare, and in some places, non-existent. It can be hard to understand something you don't have the words to think about.
And our generation has grown up with those words. So for us, it's just sort of like, all right, this is a thing, a regular everyday thing. There's nothing new to comprehend because it's been around for a while.
Yeah, in our generation, it's common to see and ask people for their pronouns. In the time period of older generations, that just wasn't happening. or if it was, those individuals would be viewed as weird. A transgender and non-binary person wasn't even allowed on TV. Now, it is common to see them represented.
Well, let's dive deeper into how these older generations think, and hopefully gain an understanding for their standpoint in the argument. To explore this issue, we interviewed members of Gen X and the millennial generation.
Now let's look at the younger one first, the millennial generation. This generation is currently between the ages 21 and 41. I interviewed a man, 38, and a woman, 40, and I asked them questions relevant to pronoun usage and how they felt about it. The man believed that science tells us that there are two genders, no more and no less. He was very confident about this and repeated it many times. He said he wouldn't disrespect anyone and he would use their preferred pronouns. However, the woman stated she believed anyone could feel however they want about their gender identity and she would respect their pronouns. While they differed in opinions, they ultimately both wanted to remain respectful to the trans and non-binary community, even if they weren't going to alter their opinion.
Caitlin, what do you think this says about millennials?
I believe this shows us that they want to remain respectful. However, some still may not agree with new pronoun usage. This may not be the case for all millennials, but at least this generation seems to be more willing to respect the trans and non-binary community.
This reminds me of an article in the Harvard Crimson by Christina Zhao titled The Case Against Mandatory Preferred Gender Pronouns, where she said, although she uses any pronouns, she usually uses she, her, because, as she puts it, since I have a woman's body and a woman's face, I know people are most comfortable using she, her to refer to me. She's implying that people associate her biological anatomy with female, so she mostly uses she, her. But what I think she's really getting at is the mentality of older generations. Our generation, Gen Z, mostly understands that your anatomy doesn't determine your preferred gender pronouns, because we've met many people that are a part of the trans and non-binary community, like Christina Zhao. And future generations, Gen Alpha, will be even less attached to this association of fixed physical and mental gender.
Yes, I agree. It's just a lot easier for the younger generation to be fluid with this idea since it was introduced to us when we were younger, whereas my grandparents would only associate gender with boy and girl. Now let's dive deeper into our generation. Caitlin, what have you learned about pronoun usage?
I read an article called Until I'm Told Otherwise, I Prefer to Call You They by Ian Aries in the Washington Post. Aries is a college professor who suggests referring to his students as they until learning the preferred pronouns. I think this idea reflects the mentality of younger generations rather than older ones. Like, there's a reason why a college professor of young adults is making this suggestion rather than the coordinator of a nursing home for baby boomers. You just don't see many older people coming out or having untraditional pronouns that need accommodation, meaning there's less familiarity with new pronoun usage among them and therefore less understanding for those who want to use untraditional pronouns.
Now that we've talked about the younger ones, what about the oldest one, Gen X?
I believe that the Gen X generation is the least willing to accept these new norms.
I wouldn't doubt it, but why do you think that is?
Gen X might be the least willing to accept these new norms because when the pronoun debate first started gaining traction, this generation was already set in their ways. I feel like people tend to reach a point in their life where it's like, okay, I've been doing X, Y, and Z for 20-something years and it's been fine. There's really no need for change.
To add on to that idea, Caitlin, I can see the opposite of that fixed mentality with younger generations. While some millennials may not support changes in pronoun usage, they were still young enough when it started coming around that they understand people find these issues important and should be respectful.
I feel like Gen X and higher generations tend to be so set in their ways, they can't really see why this concept is coming up if for decades newer neutral pronouns were not perceived to be a needed change.
Yeah, I can see why Gen X and millennials differ in opinions. I feel like this just goes to show how generational differences can cause resistance when it comes to people accepting gender-neutral pronouns. As a generation gets older, the resistance and trouble comprehending unfamiliar concepts like changing pronouns grows.
That really sums it up, Amani. One of the most influential factors in people being receptive to the new use of pronouns is the generation and social environment they grew up in. I think we could say if we want to help older generations understand new pronoun practices, we can start by recognizing the differences between the times they grew up in and the ones we're in now.
And let's remember, no matter what pronouns you use or don't, be respectful to others even if you don't understand their point of view.
We would like to thank you for listening to this episode of the 3GenZs podcast, where we dove deep into why generations have different opinions on gender-neutral pronoun usage. If you enjoyed this episode, please stay tuned for our next one.